Hello and welcome. Thank you so much for joining me today. We're going to be talking about this book right here, Before We Begin, by Ossie Wind. Before We Begin deals with what is a controversial subject. Now, if you read the book, you'd think there's no controversy at all. It's just another tool in the toolkit. But Ossie Wind has written the definitive work on what we call pre-show work. Now, I'm going to go in a different direction with pre-show than what you might expect. Pre-show is typically associated with the mentalist. And I want to read to you a definition, and there's a form, you have to pay for it, but there's a website called oneahead.com, and I think it's a great website. I think they deal with a lot of relevant topics for those of us who are magicians and mentalists, and I think you should check it out. But there's a definition of pre-show on that website, and I want to share that with you now. Pre-show is a magic technique which relies on part of the routine taking place before the trick for the larger audience begins. The main audience has no idea that something took place earlier. An example of pre-show. You're backstage, the show's about to begin, you have someone from the audience select a card, you say, I want you to think about that card during the show. So the audience, the audience participant goes out to the show, you're doing your show, and you call on the person and you say to the person, you're thinking of a card and the card is XYZ. And the person's astonished because they have no idea how it is you know the card they're thinking of, and the rest of the audience is astonished, not for the same reason. The rest of the audience is astonished because they think you just read this person's mind cold. They have no idea that something took place before the show. Now, what happens, though, when you're doing a performance for, say, a family audience or a company or an audience that knows each other, they're going to talk. And that person's going to say, well, yeah, before the show he had me select a card. Oh, okay. So that's what goes on there. But the art of the pre-show, that's a simplification. Okay, that's a gross simplification. Those of you who use pre-show, you're going to say, Dave, that's not fair. That's a simplification. Ossie Wind, though, if you're interested in this kind of work, this is the definitive work to have. In fact, I would argue that if you're a serious mentalist, you need to read this book, whether or not you're going to do pre-show. Whether or not you're going to do pre-show, you need to read this book. This book is a publication of Vanishing Inc. You know how I feel about Vanishing Inc. books. I'm just tickled pink with them. I think these are some of the best produced books on the magic market. It's a hardbound book. It's fairly small. It is, how many pages? It's 147 pages. 147 pages dealing with every aspect of pre-show you might possibly want to know. It's available from Vanishing Inc. for the price of $59.95, roughly $60. Is it worth $60? I think it is. I think it is. I think you should pick it up. I think you should read it, even if you're not going to do pre-show. Now, let me give you some qualifiers here. And I'm sure in the context of a review, Ossie Wind won't matter at all that I'm sharing some of this material. I'm just gonna read a little bit of what he calls first impressions. It's really his introduction. Some mentalists refrain from pre-show work thinking it's morally wrong. They equate pre-show with the illusions you can achieve with video editing. It feels like cutting out part of the performance. If you associate pre-show with video editing, here are a few more things to consider. Card palming, black art, lapping, could compare to the magic accomplished with pre-show. Some confuse pre-show with stooging. Do me a favor, can you say lumberjack when I ask you to think of a word? That's stooging. Pre-show is not stooging. So he's making distinctions, he's making definitions here. If you present yourself as an illusionist, conjurer, or performer that creates the illusion of mind reading, then these job titles give you license to deceive your audience and live a guilt-free life. Pre-shows should not be suspected, let alone detected. With good pre-show work, you can fool not only lay people, but seasoned magicians. And that's because good pre-show is invisible. Now, I think good pre-show is invisible. But let me ask you a question. Have you ever purchased a trick from Penguin, from Vanishing, whoever? You purchase a trick, you get it home, and you find out that there's pre-show involved. How do you feel? How do you feel? How do you think the audience feels when they talk, and they will, and they find out that pre-show was involved? Just asking. Now, let me go on with a few of these quotes. Pre-show allows you to create the convincing illusion of reading people's minds seemingly without any contrived procedures. One of the least obvious benefits of pre-show is that you gain much more freedom with your presentations. More importantly, you avoid processes that are boring and contrived. Pre-show turns tricks where you appear to know what someone wrote on a piece of paper into tricks where you appear to know what's in someone's mind. Every trick with pre-show creates a dual reality of some sort. The experience of the person directly involved with the pre-show is different from the rest of the audience. Now, he argues here on page 6, something as simple as playing music while people wait for the show to start is a sort of pre-show because it subconsciously affects your audience. The right music can elevate the mood. Now, my philosophy, this is on page 7, my philosophy about pre-show work is similar to my philosophy about using gimmicks. I don't rush to use gimmicks before exploring all the non-gimmicked possibilities. Considering gimmicks at the early stage of developing a new trick can prevent you from discovering innovative non-gimmick methods that might be better. I feel the same way about pre-show. You must ask yourself if pre-show is the right tool to achieve your goals. Compare the pros and cons for doing the trick with or without pre-show. If the gains are high with pre-show, go for it. If not, explore other approaches. Now, I like this too. This is page 8. If you're working a house party for a dozen people or so, it might not be the best choice. Pre-show works better in large venues with big crowds and most effectively when the audience members are not associates. That's very important. If you're working in an environment where people know each other and are prone to talk, you are caught. So, that is, I just wanted to kind of introduce that to you if you haven't thought about it. Think about it. Definitely read the book. It's a worthwhile book to read. Now, let me say a little bit more about pre-show. I have done less mentalism over the last few years in more traditional magic. And some of the traditional magic I do requires a little bit of pre-show. For example, I love to do the neck twister. Love to do the neck twister. I do pre-show. I get to the show early. I find someone who's mulling about, and I train them on how to do the neck twister. You turn it a little bit to the right, you turn it a little bit to the left, you turn it back, and you keep going twice, and then you turn it back right again and back. That's how you do the neck twist, and I get them to practice with it. And this is all before the show begins. So when the show starts, you know what I say? I don't say, can I find someone in the audience? No, I say, I talked to someone before the show. Come on up here. You and I, we practice this, and we do the thing. I don't pretend that it didn't happen or anything like that. I don't have to. What for? It's a deck twister. It's a joke. So I do pre-show. Another thing about pre-show. This is a book by Barry Mitchell and Steve Petra. Now, you might recognize these guys as kids show experts, and they are. These guys are incredible. If you're not familiar with their work, get familiar if you are a kid show performer. Now, Total BS is what the book is called. Total BS, Total Barry and Steve. There's a section in this book, believe it or not, on pre-show. Here it is, page 19. The pilot sells the series, The Power of Pre-Show. Now, what they do is they spend an entire chapter talking about something that is really, really important that most of you who are mentalists aren't even thinking about. You're thinking pre-show, that's when I set a trick up and I get somebody and I force a word on them, or I force a card on them, or I give them a clipboard and I ascertain something that they've written down on the clipboard to be revealed later in the show. All that's pre-show. But what they say is pre-show is an opportunity for you to establish rapport with your audience. Now, if you use pre-show for that purpose, it's a whole different kettle of fish. And I will tell you that 90% of the shows that I do require good pre-show in terms of establishing rapport with my audience. You know what I do? I have conversations with people. How are you today? How is everything? What brings you here to the show today? Have you ever seen a magician before? What did you like? What did you not like? I have a great conversation. These guys do a couple of tricks. You can do that too. It warms the audience up. They compare pre-show to the pilot of a television series to test it, to test the waters and get people used to it. If you've ever gone to see a sitcom filmed or to see any live television, there's a stage manager who's warming up the audience and kind of giving them clues of how they're supposed to respond. All that stuff is pre-show. All of it's valid. All of it's good. What I might suggest to you is that you start studying pre-show in all of its facets, not just the facets that are dealt with here with mentalism, but for non-mentalists as well. What can you accomplish with pre-show? What should be your goals with pre-show? I would suggest that to you. At any rate, thank you so much for joining me today. I hope you enjoyed this. Please comment down below. I love your comments. Please subscribe if you've not done so already. Have a great day.